Let's talk about fly casting. I think one of the reasons it's so difficult to learn to fly cast, they don't even call it by the right name. I mean, look at the size of a fly. There's no way you can cast that. They also call it casting a fly rod or casting a fly line. Well, if you take a look at that line, there's no way that you can cast that line. What it should be called is spring assisted fly line rolling and unrolling, because that's what you're attempting to do. You're going to come back and you want that line to roll out behind you nice, and you're going to come forward and you want it to roll out nice in front of you. And the fly rod, which you notice I'm not carrying one at the moment, the fly rod is a giant spring, and you use that spring to catapult the line forward and backwards. You see right here, this rubber band. That is fly casting right there. Instead of using a stretchy rubber band, you're using a flexible rod. That's the only difference between what you just saw and what you're trying to do. Now, in order to make that happen, in order to make the line roll out nice behind you, and then roll out nice in front of you and hit the water in the manner that you want it to, there's several things has to happen. There's several things that can't happen. The number one thing, imagine this is a fly rod. The number one thing that can't happen is this, or this, because you've got all that line stretched out behind you, and when you go like this, it tries to follow it, causes the back end to drop, and that's how you get a fly in the back of your neck. So wear a wide brim hat, wear eye protection. The wide brim hat, when the line hits it, it absorbs some of the force. So if you do happen to stick yourself in the back of the neck or pierce your ear, the fly won't have near as much force and it won't stick near as deep. Now, that being said, you're going to use this spring and the energy stored in it, and you're going to smoothly and efficiently transfer your motion forward, and that's going to bend that rod back, and then you're going to come up to a stiff, abrupt stop, and then the tip of the fly rod is going to go bing, and that line is going to roll out there and fall just like you want it to. So what you have to do is, when you're casting, whether it's up and down or side to side or like this, maybe you got a side cast. If you use a big fly, you want to cast off to the side, or maybe you've got a wind and you're casting over your shoulder. Either one, this has to move in a straight line. It's got to be straight that way, just like you were trying to slice bread. If you were trying to slice bread, you wouldn't go like that. You'd be careful and make a nice straight slice. So if you cast and your line is laying out on the ground in front of you like that, that's because you're doing this. And see, it's natural, perfectly natural, when you come to the stop to turn your wrist. Well, that fly line is going to follow the tip of that fly rod. So when you come out and go like this, that line's going to go like that. So you have to come, see, casting a fly rod is kind of an unnatural act, because everything you do in sports the follow through is as important as the actual thing that you're doing. Like if you're shooting basketball, you got to have a good follow through. Throwing a ball, got to have a good follow through. Throwing a frisbee, got to have the follow through. Bowling, got to have the follow through down. Very important. But fly line casting, you come to an abrupt stop. No follow through whatsoever. Now, when you're watching these guys casting, you'll think they're going like this, but they are not. They're coming to an abrupt stop, and then they're letting the end of the pole follow the line down. But they're coming to a stop to release that energy, and they're letting the line go down. And see, you got to do the same on the back. When you come back, you got to come to a sharp stop, just like you're hitting a wall. That allows the spring to unload. Your fly line will roll out behind you in your back cast. And then when your fly line gets just about straight, then you're going to come forward and come to a complete stop. And that'll let your spring unload and transfer the force to the fly line. Then you're going to follow it down. Now, once you get that down, then the next thing is, how do you bend the spring? How do you load a little more energy to the spring? There's 2 or 3 ways to do it, but the best way, when you're just learning, the best way is as you come just right before you come to a stop, take your thumb and go like that. Just give it a quick little, which allows your spring to unload. If you don't, like if you kind of just go blah, 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 then your spring unloads, blah, 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 and your line just kind of goes out there and falls. So if you're casting and your line just goes out there a little bit and falls, you're not making a sudden enough stop. Or you're not loading your rod. You're coming forward too quickly on your back cast. The funny thing is, the back cast is more important than the forward cast. But when they're teaching you, they talk about the forward cast. So if you don't get that back cast pretty good, without a good back cast, it is physically impossible to make a good forward cast. Can't happen. If you come back too soon, you don't load the rod, and your line just kind of goes blah, blah, blah. You come back too early, you crack the end of that like a whip, and flip your fly right off the end of it. So it's about timing. And it's about that back cast. It's all about the back cast. So here we go. We're going to cast a fly rod. So we're moving in a straight line like this. We're moving in a straight line like that. And we typically have our thumb on the top of the rod, because once we get to where we can make a sudden stop back and the fly rod loads and we come forward, we can add a little more. Just when we stop, just as we stop, we go like that and just put a little more force, a little more bend, and we get a little better, tighter loop. And putting that little flick on the end right there, just as you stop, you put that little flick. What that does is it forces you to make a crisp stop, because your wrist only goes so far. See, it has to make a sudden stop. And it bends a little, that fly rod, just a little extra, and that'll make your loop be tighter, and your line will run out there better, and it'll just work. If you can put that little right there on the end of it, you'll be glad you did. Okay, so here we go. We're going to come straight back and we're going to watch behind us. And when that fly line gets just about straight out there, we're going to come forward and we're going to stop, put that little flick on the end, and then we're going to let the rod follow the line down. But we're not going to go like this. We're going to go like this, stop, follow the line down. Like this, flick, let the rod tip follow the line down. You can take the ink pen and practice that. Just get it in your brain. So that's what we're doing. We are spring assisted fly line rolling and unrolling. If you think about it that way, you'll immediately see if you're doing something wrong. You watch that back cast, and you come forward, stop, put that little flick on there, let the rod follow the line down. So see, that's why if you're watching somebody that's really good, they've got that so smooth that it actually looks like they're doing that. But they're not doing this. They are doing this. And they're doing it smooth and quick that unless you're watching, you'll never see it. Okay, so here we go. Our fly rod, as you can see, is a giant spring. A reel is only used to hold the line. In freshwater fishing, if you get on a fish, it's hand-to-hand combat right here. Don't try to pick up all of that slack line that you're going to have out and get him on the reel and fight him like you would a conventional one. You do it right here. Hand-to-hand combat. To have approximately 30 feet of line now. Now I'm going to turn, I'm going to watch my back cast because that's the most important. See that laid out there fairly straight. See, come back, stop. Well, let's see what happens if I do like I tell you not to do. If I do that. Yeah, you see that? You see how that line is all laid out there, curly like a snake? You see how it's all in a pile there at the end? No bueno. Yeah, you see how much straighter? That's not perfectly straight, but I got a little breeze. And I'm not exactly a world-class fly caster anyways. That right there, that's all you need for catching a bluegill in a pond. Just like that. That's plenty. Couple more things to talk about before we go fishing. The white line that's connected to the reel is the backing. It's basically braided line, just like you would use on a regular conventional reel, except it has a coating to keep it from cutting into the fly line. See, the fly line kind of has a plastic coating and it's tapered. actually a double taper. The farther along you go, maybe it'll tell, but farther along you go, the thinner it gets. Closer it gets to the end, it's thinner. And then as it comes back up, there's some spot in here where it's at its thickest. And then it starts to taper down again. And so you get to the business end here. This is called the leader. This is 30-pound fluorocarbon. And most fly lines come with a loop on the end where you can just do a loop-to-loop connection. But I don't really like a loop up there. So this is tied on there with a nail knot and then secured with a little bit of crazy glue. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to continue this taper so when we roll that line out, it doesn't hinge. Like if you went straight, see this goes down, and now the next section is like 15-pound fluorocarbon, and it's connected with a loop-to-loop connection. That makes it easy to change. I can switch this whole thing out. If this gets damaged, or just cut it off and tie a new one. And then it continues down to 6-pound mono, and that's fastened together. It's fastened to the 15-pound fluorocarbon with a double uni knot. That's a very good knot for joining lines that are different sizes. And then we come down to our woolly booger, and it's tied on there with a non-slip mono loop. Now this loop is actually a little too big. That loop should be tied smaller, but I was in a hurry, and I'm only fishing for bluegill in a farm pond, so it's a pretty forgiving fishing environment. So that's your black woolly booger, non-slip mono loop, 6-pound, and that's called the tippet. If you hear them say tippet, that's what the tippet is. And then this is the leader, and this part of the leader is called the butt section. Now if you go buy a commercial leader, it's tapered. It may be 15 or 20-pound test on this end, and it's got a perfect taper all the way down. At the very end, it may be 2-pound test. And what happens, you got those little rolls of tippet. As you change flies or get broke off, and as you work your way back up to where it starts to get thicker, you actually cut another little piece of tippet and tie it on there, and then you don't have to go replace the whole tapered leader. You just replace the little bit of 6 or 4 or 2-pound, whatever test tippet you're using. And they don't go by pound tests. They got like 1x, 2x, whatever, but that's beyond the scope of this video. The other thing we have to talk about are flies. And I'm only going to talk about ones for catching bluegill in a farm pond, because that's the focus of this video. For the purposes of catching a bluegill in a farm pond, you only need one fly. That is a black woolly booger. This one is kind of large. You would use it more for bass, but bluegill will hit it too. But in a farm pond or a creek, that's the only thing you need to know. If you only had to pick one fly and fish with it forever, you would pick a black woolly booger. Now, here's a white one that's much smaller. And then this one is called a Clouser minnow. This one is called a bunny strip, because I don't know if you can tell, but it's made from a little bitty strip of rabbit fur. This is a bass popper, and it's a topwater bait. And as it's pulled through the water, it pops. So a highly effective way to do it is you take your bass popper, you tie it on your tippet, then you take another little piece of line, like a maybe 6-pound mono or something, you tie it here, and then you suspend this woolly booger, white or black, either one, 6, 8, maybe 10 inches down, and that's called a popper and a dropper. But it doesn't really matter if you use a woolly booger or whatever, but you got a popper on top and then another fly suspended below it. And what happens, the popper gets their attention, but they're not always hitting top water, but they might take this one. So you got 2 shots at the fish. You might catch a bass on this one, or a crappie, and you might catch a crappie or a bluegill, or depending on where you're at, trout or whatever on that one. But a popper and a dropper is highly effective in farm ponds. It's probably about as good as it gets, to my knowledge. So we got our 30 feet of line stripped off, and it's laying there in a pile. And what the heck do we do with it? I'm using the resistance of the water to pull that line up and get it out in the water. Now I got a problem. I got a big old pile of line there, and the way to get it out there so you can cast it is to do a roll cast, which hopefully the other camera is catching it. You pull the line back behind you till it forms a D, and you take it out there like that. May have to do another one. Now I can do my cast. And stripping the line back in, just like that. I'm going to do that same thing again. You wouldn't do this in a trout stream where you have to worry about scaring the fish, but a farm pond, you're just fine. I like to smoke cigars while I'm fishing. Now, if you're asking, is this how I would normally do it? The answer is no, it is not. But this is how I did it when I first got started, because I wasn't ready for all the false casting and all that other stuff. Uh-oh, fish on. There we go. Feels like a little bass. Might not be. No, bluegill. See? That could have been your very first bluegill on the fly rod, just like that. If you're casting a fly rod and your arm starts to hurt, you're doing it wrong.